Today we're going to take a look at how to remove and replace a radiator in a 2000 Toyota Camry. Step number one, underneath the car, is we're going to remove the splash shield. 9 bolts, all 10 millimeter. This is a great application if you have an electric screwdriver or small impact wrench. It makes short order of this task. Next piece, we're going to remove or disconnect some of the electronics. Step number one is the electronic coolant temperature switch and the associated wiring connector. Next piece is removing 2 oil cooler lines. This is actually not the engine oil, it's the transmission oil. We're going to remove those 2 lines. You will see there's a little bit of drip once he removes those. Not to worry, we're going to top that off when we're all done. These coolant temperature lines actually warm up the transmission faster when it's cold out, but help it cool down quicker when it's warm. Next, we're going to remove, or actually just loosen if you would prefer, the petcock at the very bottom. This will drain the fluid out of the radiator. And once complete, you can go to the top of the vehicle and take off the radiator cap, and voila, no coolant. Now let's disconnect some of the hoses. First, the upper radiator hose. If those are stuck, a screwdriver lodged between the pipe and the rubber hose makes it a little easier. There's 3 connectors for the fan and the ECT, 2 on the right and 1 on the left. Small screwdriver, and we can disconnect those. And along the way, we're going to remove the reservoir hose, or the overflow hose, on the top and set that aside. And there's that secondary connector on the passenger side for the secondary cooling fan. Once those are removed, he's going to move to the top. I take that back. Before he does that, let's get rid of the lower radiator hose. Moving the clamp back, that's called a CT clamp, a constant tension clamp. And if you have a hard time getting it off, a small pry bar, as Phil used there, makes the project a little easier. Now moving back to the top, we're going to remove the 2 upper brackets. Those are 12 millimeter bolts, about as straightforward as possible. And once those are off, we are going to slide out that old radiator. Once out, we're going to remove all of the other hardware from the old radiator to the new radiator. Step number 1 is we're going to remove those 2 fans and move them over. These fans are fundamentally the same, but there are a few slight differences, so make sure you put them back in the correct location on which side of the fan they're supposed to go. When we're tightening up the bolts, 4 on each side, about 18 foot-pounds, those are going into plastic, so there's a very low risk that they will work themselves out, but certainly don't over-tighten them because you don't want to damage those plastic threads. Now, once that is done, he's going to remove that ECT switch that we saw earlier. He's pulling that out, and you will notice once he pulls it out, there's an actual O-ring on the end. That O-ring will hold all the coolant inside the radiator, but I think what you'll see Phil do is put some extra thread sealant on that just as a layer of protection, so if that O-ring goes bad, it will still hold the coolant inside the radiator and help prevent leaks. That's the same thread compound that you can find at any of your local hardware stores. Once complete, we're going to start connecting some of the electricals and the tie downs. And once that's complete, we can put this in the vehicle. Before we do have to put the rubber supports on there. Sometimes as this rubber ages, it doesn't slide or move as well. He's putting a little grease on that to make the application easier. Generally with rubber, soap-based products tend to work a little bit better. Whatever you have is perfectly fine. Dawn, Simple Green work well. Slides that into the right location, and then he's going to put the upper pucks on, both the left and the right, tightening those down to 33 foot-pounds, and the product will be good and secure. Once that's secure, let's reconnect the electricals. There's 2 connections on the driver's side. One is for the ECT switch, and the second is for one of the 2 cooling fans. Now he's on the other side, and he's reconnecting the second cooling fan, and now the upper radiator hose. Again, if you have a hard time sliding that on, a little bit of soap makes the project easier, and then sliding that constant tension clamp back into location. Any pliers will work, although they do make specialized CT clamp tools that make the job a bit easier. And then don't forget to connect the radiator reservoir hose on the top. Now back to the bottom of the vehicle, and we're going to connect those coolant lines to the transmission. Those coolant lines actually help warm up the transmission faster in the winter, but yet keep it cooler in the summertime. So it's a good addition. That's why they put it in the radiator, so it kind of follows the temperature of the engine as much as possible. Now we're connecting the lower radiator hose and moving that CT clamp in its proper location, and then reinstalling that splash shield. Now, one thing that's interesting about splash shields, most assume that it's for preventing water splashing, as the name implies, which is true, but it's actually also designed to improve the radiator performance or the cooling of the car, as well as the air conditioning of the car. If that shield was not there, it's possible for the air, especially when parked or stable in hot traffic, warm traffic jams, for that air to go through the radiator and then down below the car. And if there's a slight backdraft, that air will actually come back up through the intake or the grill of the vehicle, and now the radiator has warmer air. It thinks it's warmer outside than it really is. And so by putting these shields on, it actually directs that airflow rearward as much as possible and improves the cooling capability and the air conditioning capability of the car while in traffic or stopped, parked up against a building, or any location where you don't have a lot of airflow across the front of that vehicle. Tightening those up, and now he's back to the front of the car, and we're going to fill it up with coolant. He's going to use a fairly specialized cap here where the funnel inserts directly into it. It just makes the project a little bit easier. You can purchase one of these for about $30. It's not a bad investment, but it's not necessary. Then we're going to add almost 2 gallons of coolant. You can either add 2 gallons of a 50-50 premix or a gallon of regular coolant and about a gallon of distilled water. Both are the same. Once it's full, he's going to turn on the engine and let it warm up. Let the engine come up to operating temperature and turn on the heater to full blast. We're trying to get all of the air bubbles in the system, in the cooler, in the radiator, in the engine, in the heater, to extract themselves. So you want to make sure it warms up enough that the thermostat opens up. Once complete, now we're going to top off that transmission oil since we lost it a little bit. Remember to properly top up the transmission oil. You want to have the engine and the transmission warm, running at idle in neutral gear, and make sure you get it between the 2 hash marks. Most people are comfortable running it a little closer to the top. Once that's done, now we're going to put the remaining coolant into the overfill bottle, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out you want to get it between the low and the high mark. Again, most people are more comfortable at the high mark or at the full mark, so just fill it up appropriately. And then as the last step, don't forget to replace the radiator cap with the proper one that will allow it to pressurize. And it pressurizes because that raises the boiling point, meaning you have more cooling capacity. Nice job to fill, and thanks for watching.